You can go.
Hello, my name is Joyce Cairns from Neuron Learning, and today we're going to talk about auditory processing and how important it is for learning. And we're going to concentrate on three areas: language, reading, and writing. And I've been working with Fast Forward for 22 years. And when I started, very few people really knew what auditory processing was. And I'm glad to say that now there is a greater awareness of the type of issues that children experience with auditory processing. And one of the founders of the program, the Fast Forward program, is Paula Talal. And I would just like to quote her. There are a couple of things that I'd like to read that I think are pertinent for what we're going to talk about today. And she says that listening to and processing ongoing speech is the fastest thing the human brain has to do. And then the second quote is, when it comes to processing or listening to auditory information, children with language-based learning problems are operating on dial-up speed, while those with good language skills are operating on high-speed internet. And I think that's a very good analogy because that's what it's all about. It's about the speed of processing information. And if we start with listening, when children are listening and they are experiencing auditory processing issues, it means that the timing between the ear receiving the information and the brain receiving the information, there's a delay. And so what we're trying to do is get that timing right, speed up the processing so that the brain registers what's being said as it's being said at the same time as the ear. So if we look at the classroom environment, for example, and if a child is listening to the teacher and the teacher is talking and the child is not processing what the teacher is saying as the teacher is saying it, it means that that child is not getting everything that's being said as it's being said. But more than that, they may experience also, they may misinterpret a sound within a word or may misinterpret a whole word, which can result in a child going off in a tangent thinking the teacher is talking about X when in fact the teacher is talking about Y. And by the time they realize that the teacher isn't talking about that at all, the teacher has moved on, and now we've two other problems. One is that if they didn't process the information, they can't remember the information. And the teacher has moved on now, they've lost their place and they lose their concentration. So poor processing impacts other cognitive skills like memory and attention. And taking instruction is also a very important part of the school day. So, for example, it wouldn't be unusual for a teacher to address a class of 11-year-olds and give an instruction like, take out your geography book, open page 40, read page 40 and answer questions 2, 3, and 5 on page 42. Now, for a child with slow processing, that would be a very, very difficult instruction for them to take in and remember and carry out. So we often see children who have poor processing also struggle with taking instructions. And parents would often say to us, we have to keep the instructions simple so that they can take one step at a time and carry out the instruction one step at a time. So we have to build up that processing speed and that processing accuracy so they can take in the information, remember the information, and carry out the instruction. With speech, the child has to process his thoughts, he has to sequence his thoughts, he has to structure his sentences with a beginning, middle, and an end. He's got to think of the words he wants to use, and he's got to deliver what he wants to say in a fluid way. And that can be really tricky. Acquiring new vocabulary can be a problem. Pronunciation can be a problem. Storytelling can be a problem. When he has to, very often parents would say to us, or teachers would say to us, that when their child tells a story, they might ramble, they might go off point, they might start in the middle. They have to be encouraged to go back to the beginning to make sense of the story. And so storytelling can be an issue, which can affect their social communications as well. So if they're in a social environment, for example, and one child is talking about what he did at the weekend, and then another child chimes in and she starts talking about what she did at the weekend, and my child who's struggling with processing, he's still processing what child number one is saying when child number two has started to talk. And then child number three starts talking, so he misses a bit of child number two, and then a bit of child number three, and so on. And so when he contributes to the conversation, his contribution can be off point because he didn't get everything. The other thing about poor processing is that you need good processing and quick processing to predict where the conversation is going. And that's important for getting the nuances and the inferences and the subtleties in language. It's very important for getting the jokes and sarcasm. And so sometimes when children struggle to process and they're not seeing where their conversation is going, they're not able to predict, or they're not getting the nuances, they may not get the joke, or they may not get the sarcasm. And that can sometimes be upsetting for them because they're not in on the joke, or they can be the butt of the joke as a result of it. And so social communications can be affected as well. And negotiations, when a child is trying to fight his ground or fight his corner or negotiate his point of view, you have to be able to think quickly on your feet. And so that processing speed is important for those social skills and negotiations as well, And it can lead to them preferring to be on their own sometimes. It can lead to them being upset or frustrated. And it can lead to, a lack of confidence or self-esteem. And so it's important to build up the processing speed for language, both for receptive language listening and expressive language speech. And so when we move on to the reading, the processing is so important for reading, for decoding the code, for getting the sounds at the beginning, the middle, and end of words, for getting the syllables and whole words, to process the grammar, like the bits we add on to the beginning of words or the end of words, the prefixes and the suffixes, like how they change the word or the meaning of the words, understanding grammar, parts of speech like nouns, verbs, prepositions, all of that. If your processing is slow, it can be really tricky to figure out, why we change words or why we use the grammar. For example, why we'd use one pronoun at the beginning of a sentence and the other pronoun at the end of a sentence. So, for example, if I was talking about myself, and I said something like, "I would like if my child came to the city with me," I use "I" at the beginning of that sentence, and I use "me" at the end of the sentence. I wouldn't put "me" at the beginning and "I" at the end, and that's a processing skill, knowing which pronoun to use, where to use it, and when. And it's the same with grammar, with the singular and the plural, the parts of speech, etc. So it can make understanding all of this very difficult if the processing speed isn't as good as it should be. And then writing is like speech. You have to process your thoughts, you have to sequence your thoughts, you have to structure your sentences with beginning, middle, and an end. And you've got to think of the words you want to use. But now you have to think of the spelling and the grammar and the punctuation. And so it all takes time if it's not happening automatically. if that speed of processing is slow, it's taking time. And so children struggle to finish exams on time, or they take ages to do their homework, their written homework or written work in school, because the spellings, they have to think about them, they have to think about the grammar, and they have to think of every part of what they're writing. And we very often see that they'll keep it as brief as possible because it's easier to keep a short sentence, to write that accurately without making a spelling mistake or a grammatical mistake. But by building up the processing, we see that the children, everything starts to improve academically. The language, the reading, the writing, and the learning. I'd just like to read out a couple of testimonials that we've gotten from parents recently. Catherine says, teachers say that he is like a different child. He's progressing really well now. Peter says, my 10-year-old son has been diagnosed with dyslexia and was struggling in school. Now his reading ability is a number of months beyond his actual school level after participating in the programme. Joyce and her team provided great service and support, enabling this great improvement. Thanks. Michelle says, my daughter is thriving in and out of school. She's very involved with swimming and water sports. Before Fast Forward, it was very difficult to get her to engage. So we see that not only the children improve academically, but their self-esteem and their confidence improves socially as well. So again, this week, if anyone would like to ask me any questions, or if you'd like me to talk with you about your own child, please feel free to contact us, and we'll get back to you. We'll answer any questions you may have, and we're happy to have a chat with you about your child and the difficulties your child may be experiencing. Thank you very much.